Research Professor of International Relations at, and I'm going to say this in English, not Spanish, because I don't want to embarrass myself, the Barcelona Institute of International Studies. And he's emeritus, I can never say that, Professor of International Relations and Politics at Sussex University. He's been involved in debates around international relations for many years, and more recently has focused on war and genocide. As a result of his work, he's been awarded in 1922 a Lifetime Achievement Award. 2022. I'm new to this. A Lifetime Achievement Award by the International Network of Genocide Scholars. Last year he published his new book, The New Age of Genocide, Intellectual and Political Challenges After Gaza, which is the book that's on sale. Martin, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. It's a great pleasure to be here in Brighton, if not to be talking about this particular topic. Because I lived in Brighton for many years, and I'm very proud that you've had such a strong Palestine solidarity movement here, and that there are so many people who are active in this cause. And I want to start by saying something about the circumstances of tonight. You talked about the pressure that the Friends Meeting House has been under. I mean, I think it is shocking. It still shocks me, although obviously I understand why they're doing it. It shocks me that people are trying to stop people talking about these issues. And this isn't the first time it's happened to me. It doesn't happen all the time, but this isn't the first time. And the reason, and I don't think this is personal at all, I think this is all to do with this word genocide. But it isn't just a word. It isn't just the word that they are objecting to. It is what it signifies. It signifies that we are aware that Israel has deliberately destroyed Gaza, that Israel has deliberately inflicted everything that we know it has inflicted on the people of Gaza, and that we are not going to let them get away with this. That is what it signifies. And the reason that I think that they're particularly doing it at the moment is because over the last year, public opinion has shifted away from Israel. Public opinion has started to recognise the genocide in Gaza, and they are aware of this, and they are fighting back with everything they can. So these terrible stabbings in London a couple of weeks ago have been a pretext, really, for a campaign, new campaign against the Palestine solidarity movement, and that I think is what's going on here. So I'm going to talk tonight about genocide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to persuade you that what they're doing is genocide, because I think by now the argument is largely settled. As I said, a lot of public opinion recognises that. I think most of the people who, in the first stages of Israel's murderous campaign after 2023, were doubtful about whether it was genocide, most of those people who were honestly doubtful are now recognising the genocide, and we are left mostly, the people who are saying, no, it isn't genocide, they are the people who are saying Israel is being justified in what it's doing, that Israel has not done any wrong. They're the people who would raise objections as well if we were to say, well, Israel has committed terrible atrocities, Israel has committed war crimes, Israel has committed crimes against humanity. They don't accept any of those things. So that's where we are in general. So what I'm going to try and talk about tonight really is assuming that most people here tonight recognise the terrible crimes that Israel has committed. I'm going to talk about why we understand them as genocide and what it means in a wider sense. And I hope this will be interesting and help you to focus some of your thinking about these issues, and then they help in the political arguments which you will have as a campaign. So, how do I get this? Is that right? Yes. So, I want to start just by by talking a bit about the question of genocide in Palestine in a wider, a longer sense, because in my understanding, this is not a question that began in 2023. Rashid Khalidi, the Palestinian historian, wrote this book, The 100 Years' War on Palestine, which was published a little before 2023. And that says that there has been this terrible conflict in Palestine, which is a result of settler colonialism and involves resistance to it. And this has been going on for all this time. And so, from my perspective, as a genocide scholar, I've been involved with issues to do with genocide for about 25 years now, thinking through what genocide means and writing about genocide in a comparative way. I'm not a Israel-Palestine scholar like some people are, but I've obviously read a lot about it. From my perspective, this century of war on Palestine that Rashid talks about is also a century in which questions of genocide have been posed by the way in which the Zionist movement and then the State of Israel have acted over this period. So, in the field of genocide studies, which I belong to, one of the big conclusions of the last 20, 30 years especially, is that settler colonialism is one of the contexts in which genocide is most common. We tend to think about genocide, and certainly some of our opponents think about genocide exclusively in terms of the Holocaust. But genocide is a more general idea, a more general concept, a more general legal category as well as a sociological category, and it's something which applies much more widely, and one of the conclusions that researchers have come to is that it applies particularly in cases of settler colonialism. And Zionism is a settler colonial movement. Its founders talked about it as a colonial enterprise. There can really be no doubt about that. And I argue, and I argued this first of all in a paper about 15 years ago, that the history of the Zionist colonization in Palestine throws up big questions of genocide. And I do this because I think that particularly the idea of transfer, the idea which was there in Zionist thinking from really quite early on, was the idea that in order to have a Jewish state in Palestine, you would have to transfer out a large part of what they call the Arab population and what people there themselves call Palestinians. And so there was this tension. And in my understanding of genocide, aiming to remove a whole population is in itself a form of genocide, because people's lives and communities are based in particular places. If you say we're going to uproot a whole population, you are destroying that community in a sense, and you can only do it through violence. Zionists, like many other perpetrators of what is called ethnic cleansing, I don't particularly like that term, but the perpetrators of forced removal of populations, they say, oh well, it can be voluntary, it can be benign, but it isn't. It never is. It wasn't in Bosnia, it wasn't in Myanmar a few years ago, where the Rohingya were forced out, and it certainly wasn't and would never have been in Palestine. So my argument is that this idea of transfer in Zionist thinking always threatened genocidal destruction of the Palestinian society, and that this is really basically what happened with the Nakba. The Nakba, the forced removal of around 750,000 Palestinians, the majority of the Palestinian population at the time, in 1948, as part of the establishment of Israel, that was in itself a genocidal event, a genocidal expulsion. It destroyed the majority of Palestinian society. It erased whole villages and towns and urban districts in which the Palestinians lived. In many cases they were built over, or in many cases they weren't built over, they were just left as empty places. And of course in Palestinian thinking there's been a lot of emphasis on the fact that the Nakba didn't end in 1948. It was something which carried on. And I've just listed here the main context of Palestinian oppression in the last 58 years, or nearly 59 years now, has been the occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza. And credible arguments have been made by people who study genocide and study Palestine, that a lot of what has happened in the West Bank especially, but also in East Jerusalem in the last decades, has been a process of slow motion genocide, in which the Israeli state, the Israeli military and the settlers between them in different ways at different times have gradually forced out more and more Palestinians from different areas of Palestine. So this is not a wholesale genocide. It's not even a wholesale mass expulsion in the way that happened in 1948, but it's something which has been going on throughout the last decades, and something which has accelerated, of course, very much in recent times, so we'll come back to that. And I think the other questions of genocide around Israeli policy in Gaza before 2023, the blockade of Gaza, which denied the Palestinian population of Gaza the ability to move it freely in and out of their own territory, a crowded territory. You know, I mean, Gaza is it's a bit bigger than Brighton and Hove, but a lot smaller than East Sussex. So it's a small territory with more than 2 million people, and for all these years before 2023, they were subject to a blockade, a siege, if you like, and the Israelis were controlling things like the amount of foodstuffs which entered into Gaza. You know, they had a policy to try and restrict the diet of the Palestinian population of Gaza so that they wouldn't starve to death, but they would feel the pinch in terms of their nutrition. So that this isn't genocide, but it's something which is on the route to genocide. In the sense of it's a collective punishment. You know, the Israelis objected to the people in Gaza not only because they were Palestinians, but because they had had the temerity to vote in the only free elections that took place for Hamas, and that was sufficient to demonise them. Now there's this idea of mowing the grass, which you may have heard of. This is the Israeli doctrine. It's not just a popular term, it's actually been codified as a strategic doctrine. You can find articles in learned academic strategic journals using this, explaining this doctrine of using massive violence periodically to suppress the people of Gaza, which happened several times from 2008 onwards, with hundreds or even thousands in one or two cases of people killed. And whole districts razed, the sort of thing we've seen in the last 2.5 years, but on a smaller scale and more localized. So all of these, it seems to me, were at the very least intimations of genocide. They were pointing in this direction. So what happened in 2023 was not out of the blue. And indeed, we can see what Hamas did on October the 7th as a sort of inversion of this. It's a sort of directing the same sort of violence back at the Israeli civilians that Israel had directed at the Palestinian civilians in Gaza. It doesn't, in my view, I'm not supporting that. It doesn't excuse it. There's no excuse for this sort of violence against civilians from wherever it comes. But I think it helps to explain what happened. And so we come to Gaza, to 2023, to October the 7th. And this is the article I wrote, which was published on the 13th of October 2023, in which I was already warning about Israel beginning a genocide. And the reason that I said this, and I wasn't the only person in the genocide field who said this, but although most of my colleagues took a bit longer to come to this conclusion, but I wasn't the only one who said it at exactly this time. I said it because when you take all these things together, it was very, very worrying what was happening. The genocidal rhetoric of Israeli leaders, which was quoted in the International Court of Justice in January 2024 by the President of the International Court of Justice, as the reason why that court was issuing a warning to Israel, something I'll come back to in a moment. But that rhetoric, which has continued ever since, it wasn't just something which happened in the immediate days after October the 7th, but it's something we've seen on and off throughout the last two and a half years. That, together with the launching of this huge bombardment which happened within 48 hours of October the 7th, the Israelis were bombing with an intensity and with a destructiveness and a murderousness which has not been seen in other wars of recent decades. I mean, that's been studied, and it's been shown that the rate of killing in October 23 was many times bigger than any comparable events in other so-called wars of recent times. Then understanding what it means for Israel's leaders to have been humiliated, because they were. Israel's leaders were caught out, they were complacent, they ignored their own intelligence, they allowed something to happen which they had many perfectly good means of preventing. So they were humiliated. We know that when leaders are humiliated, they compensate by launching extreme reactionary policies. So, think of 9/11 and then Bush's war on terror. Think of Margaret Thatcher and the Falklands War and the sending of the task force. But in this case, because Hamas had committed a massacre of Israeli civilians, Israel is launching a much bigger massacre. And the reason, I understand that is partly because of their doctrine, which they already had, which we'd already seen in the other Gaza wars and in Lebanon, where they deliberately impose disproportionate violence on civilians in punishment for military opposition. And this history of previous massacres, and also because, going back to our understanding of how colonialism is a context of genocide, in many previous cases in the history of the last centuries, where the colonized have attacked the colonizers and killed some of their people, especially their civilians, the colonizers have always responded with much bigger, much more powerful, much more terrible violence. So that's a well-established pattern, and so it wasn't really a surprise to me that the things were heading in this direction. Now, as I said, I'm not going to try and prove to you that it's genocide, but I'm just going to say something about the character of this, because there's a lot of discussion. The people out there would say if it doesn't look like Auschwitz, it isn't a genocide, and that isn't how the law understands genocide. It isn't how academics who study genocide understand it. It isn't what Raphael Lemkin, the Jewish lawyer who invented the idea of genocide, meant by genocide. Genocide is the destruction of the deliberate destruction of a group of people. But that destruction can take many different forms, and it can happen in many different ways. So the Holocaust, in the end, was a total extermination policy. But that is actually that was the conclusion of the Holocaust. Nazi policy before that was not so extremely murderous. And the Nazis did things like expelling people, moving whole populations, which is what happened in the other cases I mentioned. So many genocides are genocides of expulsion. So these are two different types of genocide. Now, in Gaza, many writers, many commentators say, and obviously if you listen to what Israeli politicians say, believe that one of the end games that the Israelis see is actually to remove the whole of the Palestinian population from the strip. Now, I think that's still that's definitely part of their thinking. I think it's still a possible outcome of the terrible situation which still exists in Gaza. But that isn't actually what has happened in Gaza over the last 2 years. Basically, the population has been trapped in Gaza. And what the idea which I think captures what's happened is this idea of the deliberate crippling of a society and of the people within it. And this is how, I mentioned Lemkin, this is how he described the wider Nazi genocide during the Second World War, that it was a policy to cripple the occupied countries. He focused quite a lot on occupation. That was the original context of the idea. So, applying that to Palestine isn't a fanciful idea at all. He said that was what the Nazis basically wanted to do. Before they ended up trying to exterminate the Jews, they were trying to cripple the occupied societies more generally, and by that they meant destroying the existing political and social institutions and reducing the population to misery and poverty and generally limiting their life chances in a very severe way. And that basically, it seems to me, is what has happened in Gaza over the last 2.5 years. So although, a lot of people have seen the genocide expressed in the mass bombardment and the killing which has resulted from that. I think it's more than that. These are, it seems to me, are the main policies. This idea of ungrounding is an interesting idea. This is another book by an academic who's helped to expose a lot of what Israel has done. He's a man called Neil Weitzman, who is the director of a consultancy called Forensic Architecture, based at Goldsmiths in London. And he argues that what Israel has done is he says, unground Palestinian society in Gaza, in the sense of completely destroying the physical infrastructure, to the extent that in many parts of Gaza today, you can't actually work out even where the buildings and the streets were, because the destruction had been so systematic. They didn't stop at bombing. They then, especially in recent times, have gone in with the bulldozers and cleared whole areas. Not all of Gaza, but quite a lot of it is like that. So that's one aspect. So dehousing the population is a fundamental aspect of this. They haven't expelled the Palestinians of Gaza from the territory, but they have dehoused them within the territory. The vast majority of people are now have been living for 2 years, even in many cases, in the ruins, in tents, in terrible conditions, and that's a fundamental feature of this genocide, and which enfeebles the population. It's such a struggle for them to live in these conditions that it makes resistance very, very difficult. And then the killing and the wounding. We are talking about. The Gaza official figures are about just over 75,000 killed, but all the people who've looked at this seriously, academics who've looked at this, have come to the conclusion that these are underestimates, that the real figures are well over 100,000 and possibly much higher. and wounding. I mean, we tend to forget, that it's not just the people who've been killed, it's all these people who have been physically harmed. Gaza has the largest population of child amputees in the world, and that has been deliberately caused by Israeli policy. That is one of the marks of this genocide. And then the policies of starvation. I talked about how they were trying to control the diet of Palestinians even before 2023. Well, we know that at many points in the last 2.5 years that has been accentuated and deliberately made more and more difficult for people to get sufficient food, even to live. And some people have died, and many more are malnourished, and many more are going to suffering lifelong conditions as a result, or probably prove to be lifelong conditions, as a result of systematic malnutrition. I gave a talk about 18 months ago now in Amsterdam, and when I talked there, people understood, because the Dutch in the later stages of the Second World War went through what was called the Hunger Winter, where the Germans restricted their food supply. And the Dutch have been studying this experience for the last 3/4 of a century, because it had profound effects on the health of people, even though after the war Netherlands was restored as a relatively prosperous country within a number of years. It nevertheless had these effects, and Gaza is nowhere near being restored as a prosperous territory. So, what about the crimes? You'll, I'm sure, be familiar with the case in the International Court of Justice, where South Africa is accusing Israel of genocide. And this was brought in December 2023. So, but within 2 months of Israel starting to attack Gaza, it was sufficiently evident to a government which wasn't directly involved, but which saw the terrible things that were happening, to prepare, to get the expertise and the evidence together to bring a case against Israel in the ICJ. And in January 2024, so that's 28 months ago or something like that, the ICJ said there was a plausible risk of genocide in Gaza. This case will go on probably for years. It could be several years before it's finally adjudicated. The court is at the moment here doing the final hearings on the case against Myanmar over the Rohingya in Myanmar, which was brought originally 8 or 9 years ago. So it takes time, but they have issued a statement that there was a probable risk. They ordered Israel not to commit genocide. Now, they wouldn't have ordered Israel not to commit genocide if they didn't think there was a real chance that they were doing it or about to do it. And they gave them instructions to allow sufficient aid into the territory to feed the population. And of course, that didn't happen. So they made more instructions. Still didn't happen. They made more instructions. And that went on in the first half of 2024. Then there's the cases in the International Criminal Court, where Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant have been charged with various war crimes and various crimes against humanity. Very, very serious crimes, including starvation and murder and persecution, all sorts of crimes. And the ICC didn't charge them with genocide. But I don't know if any of you saw a very interesting interview with Karim Khan, who is the chief prosecutor of the ICC, on Mehdi Hassan's Zeteo channel. I don't know if you know Zeteo. It's a US-based but international global alternative independent news channel, and an hour-long interview between Mehdi Hassan, who is a very respected journalist, and Karim Khan. And Karim Khan was questioned about this, and he said, no, we didn't charge it with genocide, but this isn't the end of the matter, that the case, the the work of the ICC is still ongoing, and he implied that it wasn't impossible that they would bring genocide charges, and he certainly didn't say no, that wouldn't be appropriate. The reason, of course, that they haven't brought them, well, the reason, not of course, but I think the reason they haven't brought them is that these charges, war crimes, crimes against humanity, have caused so much opposition to the International Criminal Court from Israel, but particularly from the United States, from Trump, that they have sanctioned the judges, they've sanctioned the chief prosecutor, they've sanctioned the court itself, as well as sanctioned people like Francesca Albanese, the UN rapporteur. I think it's because of that. I think they know. I mean, these charges are serious enough. Crimes against humanity is not a light charge. You know, the crime of humanity against humanity, of murder and persecution, those crimes rather, they're very serious charges. If and when, let's hope it's when Benjamin Netanyahu finally reaches The Hague, he will, even on those charges, he will be looking at very long sentence. So genocide is in there, in those charges as well, I think. It's just that the lawyers, for various reasons, haven't yet reached that stage of indictment. Now, in my new book, if you can see the cover there, I argue this is the new age of genocide. And I argue this for various reasons, but primarily because genocide, I mentioned that we talk about genocide in the colonial period, in historic colonial societies. And we talk about genocide during the Second World War and the Holocaust and other genocide of the Nazis and also of others. But since 1945, most cases that people think of as genocide have been in the post-colonial world. And certainly they have been cases in which the perpetrators have been states and armed movements which have not been core allies of the West. In some cases they've been states and armed movements which have been opponents of the West. And so the main argument about the role of the West in relation to genocide has been that the West hasn't prevented it. So in Bosnia, for example, it was the Serbian nationalists who were committing genocide against Muslims and Croats, and so the criticisms that people made of Western governments were that they didn't do enough to stop it. They didn't need enough to influence the Serbians to prevent that, or they didn't intervene enough to prevent it. I think we're in a totally different ballgame here since Gaza, because here we're in a situation now where the West, above all the United States, but not only the United States, European countries as well, other Western countries, are participating in genocide. This genocide that's happened in Gaza is not just an Israeli genocide. It couldn't have happened without the United States. It couldn't have happened without the weapons, the money, the political support which the US under Biden as well as under Trump gave to Netanyahu and Israel. And it couldn't really also have happened without the widespread support and at the very least condoning of the genocide by other Western governments. So that's a fundamental difference. The West has been participating. Other differences. Within Israel itself, Israel is not a democratic state. I have no intention of arguing that it's a democracy, but it is democratic in a sense as far as its Israeli Jewish citizens are concerned. There are the forms of democracy, although they're mainly available for the Jewish citizens of Israel, rather than the Palestinian citizens, let alone the Palestinians under occupation. And Israel's society, Israel's democracy, as far as it exists, has been mobilized in this genocide. This is not a genocide of an openly authoritarian regime which destroys all opposition. This is a genocide where the opposition agrees with the government. You know, the one thing that the Israeli opposition and the government agree on is what Israel has been doing in Gaza. They have big differences about other things, but they agree about that. So it's also an international genocide I've just been talking about. It's an ultra-modern genocide. People talk about the Holocaust as an extremely modern genocide. There was a famous book written called Modernity in the Holocaust a few decades ago, because the Nazis used the most extremely up-to-date modern methods to kill the Jews. Well, Israel's genocide isn't the same as the Nazis. The modern methods today are different from those of the 1940s, but this is a genocide which has been conducted, with the latest weaponry, with these F-35s, which British as well as other Western countries' armaments industries are creating. It's been conducted with AI, which is the technology of the 2020s, isn't it? So, this is different from the genocide that being carried out, for example, by the Rapid Support Forces in Sudan, who are massacring civilians. Which is, you don't actually need to have an ultra high-tech modern state in order to massacre civilians. Unfortunately, it's a sort of equal opportunity thing for armed movements too. But this is what Israel's genocide is about. There's also this genocidal mentality. You will have heard Donald Trump in the last couple of days talking about creating one big glow over Iran, implying a threat which he made before when he talked about erasing a whole civilization, of using nuclear weapons to destroy Iran if they don't give in to what he's doing. So there's a genocidal mentality, it seems to me, in Trump, which is, the Iran war is not a genocide, but the mentality is part of what he's doing there. And that you could see that also in the mass deportation thinking of far-right leaders like Trump and some others closer to home. And it's something which also you can also see in the thinking of Vladimir Putin, with his attempt to raise distinctive Ukrainian culture and society. So this is a mentality of some of the most powerful leaders in the world, which was already evident in the case of Putin before 2023, and which is now gripping whole sections of Western political leadership. And I talked about the attacks on international law. International law has never been perfect. International law has never caught all the people who've perpetrated genocide or other crimes. But the West at least had this principle, this commitment to it. And European states especially were all signed up to the International Criminal Court. America never joined it, but they did collaborate with it in some cases. That's gone out of the window almost, because I was talking about Trump's attacks on the ICC, and we've seen other Western leaders. They haven't been standing up to Trump on that. They haven't been sticking up for international law. How many countries have allowed Benjamin Netanyahu to overfly their airspace on his regular trips to Washington over the last 2 years? But many European countries have allowed that. Only Spain, I think, particularly stood out against that. So, international law is under attack in a way, and it's been bypassed and denigrated in a way that we didn't see before. In some ways, you could say this is the end of the era of genocide prevention. The Western countries over the last few decades have had this ideology, maybe they haven't always done it in practice, that genocide is something to be prevented. Well, I don't think that's where we are anymore. British complicity. I've got another book cover for you. I'm not giving you too many book covers, but there is some good reading out there, and this is one example of it. Peter Oborn's book, Complicit, Britain's Role in the Destruction of Gaza. Anybody who hasn't read it, who wants to look into more seriously what Britain has been doing, really needs to look at this, because although only the US has really been the essential support for Israel in Gaza, with all the other countries which have taken part. I mean, Germany has supplied the second largest amount of weaponry to Israel. It's supplied an enormous amount of money. I mean, we complain about the repression of the Palestine movement in this country, and rightly so. But you go to Germany, it's another level up. It really is bad, and so is many countries. But we are very much in there. We're very much in there because I think actually after America, we have given the most direct military support to Israel in this genocide. All those surveillance flights, which I imagine you know about, the RAF, day in, day out, flying over Gaza, sharing the surveillance data with Israel on the pretext of rescuing the hostages. But they carried on doing this long after it was known that Israel wasn't really interested in rescuing the hostages. It was mainly interested in bombing, and it was prepared to carry on bombing and destroying, even killing some of the hostages. And Britain carried on sharing the data. They carried on doing it long after it was obvious that there was no way in which Israel could really be distinguishing between rescuing hostages and bombing civilians. They carried on doing it even to the point where the British Defence Minister had to admit that Israel wasn't telling Britain what it was using this surveillance data for. So there's that. There's all the geopolitical support that Israel has given that Britain has given to Israel in international forums over the last period. There's a political support within this country. The way in which the people out there are linked into, in some cases, networks within the Labour and Conservative parties. There's the media support. We have this national media which is almost entirely, not entirely, but almost entirely complicit in the denial of the genocide and the support for the genocide. And we have the repression of the movement. This repression is part of the genocide in a sense, because the genocide cannot happen if there is sufficient opposition among the states that are supposedly allied to Israel to it being carried on. Even Trump has responded at one or 2 points to the shifts in public opinion, and the British government has made some shifts, rhetorical shifts at times, because of the extent of the opposition. So the repression is really an important part of it. And just mention that Peter Oborn and I did a good session in SOAS, which is on YouTube if anybody wants to follow up. Right. Denial of the genocide. This is you can't have genocide without genocide denial. When the Nazis were carrying out their genocide, they made sure that nobody knew about it. They didn't broadcast it to the world. And although we're in a vastly different period, Israel is a different country, so the genocide's on a different scale, the international context is all different. The media environment is different. It's not in the context of a world war. All these things are different. But we still have the basic forms of denial. Now, another book cover. This is an old colleague of mine, Stanley Cohen, another Jewish academic, and somebody who was a South African Jew who worked in this country and then went to Israel as an academic and studied the conditions of Palestinian detainees in Israeli prisons and detention centres. And he came back and wrote this book about states of denial and knowing about atrocities and suffering. And he came to the conclusion that there were three main forms of denial. There's literal denial. So you'll be familiar from this from the Holocaust. From the Holocaust, literal denial would be saying there were no gas chambers, 6 million people didn't die. If people died, it wasn't as a result of a deliberate policy. In the case of Israel, we know how much they have gone to what lengths they have gone to try and stop the truth about what's going on come out. The killing of journalists, the blocking of, particularly of Palestinian journalists, the blocking of international journalists, and of course this carries through into the Western media themselves with the failure to report, the distortion of the reporting, so that people don't know, or people didn't know, at least to start with. The fact that more than half the population recognises genocide shows that ultimately the information has got through as a result of the courageous efforts of Palestinian citizen journalists and others. But there's that literal, the most important thing really is probably interpretive denial. How you interpret what's going on. So it's got to the stage now where nobody can deny the huge destruction and suffering in Gaza. But of course, right from the start, we've had this line, if people are being killed, it's the fault of Hamas. If you criticise it, you're an anti-Semite. And a special version of it, of course, is it isn't genocide. I've talked a bit about that before. So these are all ways of interpreting, even if you recognise that some terrible things are happening, interpreting them in such a way as to make it possible for Israel still to carry on doing them. That's what the point of denial really is. But Stan also proposed that this was a form of denial, which I think is very interesting because in the last year, people have started to recognise the genocide in a big way, and this public opinion has moved against Israel. And you found liberal newspapers like The Guardian have come out and said, yes, it is genocide, which in the first year or so they certainly weren't willing to do. But people are saying, yes, it may be genocide, but we don't have to do too much about it. My favourite example is Ed Davey, who did come out and say it was genocide. A little while before the so-called ceasefire of October last year, he said it was genocide. But then there was the ceasefire, and then there was the proposal that the UK should not take part in Eurovision. And Ed was asked about this, and he said, oh no, well now there's a ceasefire, we don't need to boycott Eurovision. Now, I mean, I'm not picking him out for, I mean, he's not the worst. But it shows the, if you like, the fundamental unseriousness of a lot of there is this recognition in our society that Israel has done terrible things. But there's this pervasive sense that, either you can't do anything about it or we shouldn't do anything about it because Israel are allies or because, it might hurt the feelings of some Jewish people or something like that. So this is the case where you recognise it, but you still avoid the implications. That's why he calls it implicatory genocide. So where does this leave us? Gaza today. I think really the genocide hasn't really ended in any meaningful sense. The bombardment is on a much lesser scale. The killing is reduced, the direct killing. So, that's small mercy that the people there, I think, do understand. But it does continue, and all of this is really. I mean, I've got a map here. That's the map. You can see the yellow line. So the area, the light green area is the area that Israel is directly occupying, Israeli troops are occupying. And the rest is the area within which the Palestinians are mainly concentrated, especially in the bottom corner, in the southwest of the territory. And of course, we've heard in the last week that that yellow line is shifting. And it's not shifting so as to allow the Palestinians more room. It's shifting, there's apparently an orange line as well now, inside the area where the Palestinians are still able to sort of live. And for my money, they are still in charge. Israel and the United States are still in charge. There's no serious effort to improve the conditions of the people. There are some small improvements taking place, maybe, but they are still blocking international aid organisations. They are still stopping necessary supplies, foodstuff, means of shelter, etc., from getting in. And most insidiously, there's also the plan still talks about eventually replacing the Palestinian society with this glossy corporate Riviera that Trump has been on about for more than a year now. Whether it will ever happen, whether that's what they really want to do, we don't know, but that's what they're talking about. And that's a policy for replacement, for erasure, or the Palestinians, if they're still allowed to live in Gaza, will be in sort of gated communities, or maybe when we will talk about them as concentration camps of some sort. And the worst aspect of this, the media and political blackout. Well, not the worst, but the worst is, as far as we're concerned in this country, the blackout on understanding this and on making people aware of it. So, why do I call it the genocide that changed the world? I've gone on more than my allotted 45 minutes, so I'll try and wind up. Basically because it seems to me it's empowered the Israelis, the fact that they've got away with this to a large extent, it's empowered them, it's encouraged them in their project of regional domination, which we can see now in the war in Iran, where Netanyahu played such a pivotal role in persuading Trump to go and attack Iran for a second time. And we can see it in the Israeli actions in Lebanon, which are in south of Lebanon is a lot in common with what they've done in Gaza. Essentially, they are raising the Lebanese society, especially Shia society, in a whole swathe of Lebanon. It's an extension of the genocide, I think, in many ways. I've got this picture because this is a hospital in Lebanon where they put on the walls the sections of the Geneva Conventions, that's the laws of war, which forbid attacking civilian hospitals. And this is a hospital which has been damaged by Israeli action, and the courageous journalist whose name is across this, and she gave me permission to use this, I contacted her on Twitter, she photographed this just after the Israelis had bombed just behind the building. So that this is what we've seen in Gaza is going on in Lebanon. And it changed the world also in the effect on Europe. I mean, we look around at the role of Europe today, and there are all these questions about what on earth is Europe going to do in the face of America, which is no longer an ally in any meaningful sense. Whether or not you thought it should have been an ally in the first place, but it isn't, even for those who desperately want it to be an ally, and which is threatening to do things which directly cut across European NATO members' interests, like Greenland. The effect of the genocide and the links which European countries have with Israel, to some extent independently of the United States, it isn't just through the US and Trump, is really stopping. It's one of the big factor which is stopping Europe from coming to some sort of recognition of the need for an alternative to Trump, to the US alliance. And this is particularly acute here, of course, in this country, because we are completely shackled to the United States by 80 years of military collaboration and complete, more and more complete economic and cultural penetration. And this is a lot of what's behind this repression, that the European governments, like our own, cannot free themselves of this Israeli linkage and the need to protect Israel. I mean, that's what that's what all the court cases we see with Palestine Action, all these things, and the against Palestine Solidarity campaign leaders, and all the attempts to ban protest and restrict protest are about. And then there's the division of the centre and left in politics within Europe. I think this is another thing that we need to think about. When Trump was re-elected in 2024, that was largely, well, it wasn't only because, but it was partly and crucially because of the way in which the Democrats had alienated the left, the pro-Palestinian movement, the Muslims. Trump only won by a small margin in the popular vote and in the swing states. In several of those states, he could easily have been defeated if the Democrats hadn't gone out of their way to drive away people like us, that are equivalents in the United States. And in a sense, that's what Starmer, the Labour Party, have been doing in Britain as well. The repression which they've directed against us is such that it makes it very difficult for, imagine, for many people in this room to think about voting Labour again. I know many of us probably have voted Labour many times in the past. And that is well, we could end up with our own Trump, couldn't we? The man who's won more seats in the local elections than anyone else. I don't need to really to go on about that. So, finally winding up, is there any hope? I think there is hope, because I think there are signs of overreach in our opponents' actions. I think Israel may have overplayed its card. It's made itself so its hand. It may have made it so unpopular internationally that it's not going to recover very easily. Trump has obviously miscalculated, to say the least, in his war on Iran, and this is not going well. Politically, Trump is therefore exposing himself to the risk, unless he can rig the midterm elections, he's sufficiently the risk of losing. Starmer, of course, is almost toast as we speak, and the Labour Party, has made a historic mistake. And there are lots of other issues apart from Gaza, but Gaza has been a fundamental issue. So this is the importance of genocide in world politics. People tended to think, oh no, genocide isn't very important politically. It's something that happens in faraway places that we don't know about, maybe we don't care about. Well, when you talk about Gaza, when you talk about what Israel is doing, that's no longer true. And we are so involved, and it affects so many people in this country and in other Western countries, that's no longer true. So, I think there is hope. And I mean, I think resistance in Palestine is very difficult. Maybe I won't go there, but the worldwide solidarity movement is continuing. I found this picture on Facebook from recent protests.